Leah Marshall had faced adversity before. As a black woman in the legal field, she had long learned how to navigate the barriers and biases that came with the territory. But today felt different. Today, she wasn't just a judge presiding over another case. She was walking into a battle that could change the way racial profiling was handled in Louisiana forever. Her heart pounded as she glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 10 minutes. That was all the time she had left before the trial began. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her chest. Kevin Daniels, a young black man, had been arrested in his own neighborhood without cause, and the officer who detained him had claimed he simply fit the description. It was a story Leah had heard too many times before. It was personal. She pulled into her usual parking space in front of the courthouse, her hands gripping the steering wheel for just a moment longer than necessary. Outside, the grand steps of the courthouse were swarmed with reporters, their cameras poised, their voices an eager hum in the air. The city was watching. The country was watching. Leah wasn't in the mood for questions or flashing lights. Not today. Instead of heading through the main entrance, she opted for the side door, a route she had taken countless times to avoid the media frenzy. The sound of her heels clicking against the pavement was steady, confident. She had a job to do, and she intended to do it, no matter the obstacles. As she approached the entrance, she spotted a young police officer standing at his post. He was tall, rigid in posture, his crisp uniform neatly pressed. His eyes locked onto her the moment she came into view. Leah didn't think much of it at first. Security was always tight around high-profile trials. She reached for the ID badge hanging around her neck, her fingers grazing the smooth plastic. It was a routine she had done 100 times before. Flash the badge, get inside, start the trial. But before she could even hold it up, the officer stepped forward, blocking her path. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification," he said, his tone sharp, almost clipped. Leah raised an eyebrow, momentarily taken aback. She lifted the badge higher so he could clearly see the bold letters printed across it. "Judge Leah Marshall." "I'm Judge Marshall," she stated firmly, her voice calm but unmistakably authoritative. "I'm presiding over the Daniels case this morning. I need to get inside." The officer's gaze didn't move to the badge. Instead, his eyes scanned her from head to toe, assessing, scrutinizing. Leah could feel it, the weight of his suspicion pressing against her skin like an invisible force. "There's been an incident nearby," he said finally, his hand hovering over the belt at his waist. "And you match the description of someone involved." For a moment, Leah just stood there, her mind struggling to process the irony of the situation. The sheer absurdity of it. She was about to oversee a case on racial profiling, and here she was, being profiled at the courthouse doors. Her pulse quickened, but her face remained composed. She had been in situations like this before. She knew better than to let anger take control. "Officer," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "I don't have time for this. The trial starts in less than 10 minutes, and I need to be inside that courtroom. Now, if you would just..." The officer didn't move. If anything, his stance grew more rigid. His fingers twitched near his belt, dangerously close to the handcuffs clipped to his waist. "I don't care who you say you are, ma'am," he interrupted, stepping closer. His voice was firm, unwavering. "You're going to need to come with me." Leah inhaled sharply. This was escalating fast. She could see it in his eyes, the hardened look, the mix of suspicion and quiet contempt that she had encountered too many times in her life. He wasn't seeing a judge. He wasn't even seeing a woman with authority. He was seeing a black woman who, in his mind, didn't belong. Her fingers tightened around her badge, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" Leah turned, relief washing over her at the sight of Sergeant Michael Harris approaching. He was an older black officer, one of the few in the department she had encountered over the years. His expression was a mixture of surprise and growing frustration as his eyes flicked between Leah and the officer standing in front of her. "Marshall." His brows furrowed as recognition dawned in his gaze. "Judge Marshall." "Yes," Leah replied, her voice tight. Harris turned sharply to the younger officer. "Stand down," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. The younger officer hesitated, clearly bristling at being reprimanded in front of Leah. "She matches the description," he muttered under his breath, as if trying to justify his actions. "That's the judge you're trying to detain," Harris snapped, his voice low but firm. "Do you want to lose your job today?" A tense silence settled between them. Leah could see the conflict in the young officer's face, his pride warring with the realization of what he had just done. After a long moment, he finally stepped back. Leah let out a quiet breath, forcing herself to maintain composure. Losing her temper now would accomplish nothing. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Harris asked, his voice softer now. She nodded, though her jaw remained clenched. "I'm fine. Thank you." Without another word, she turned and strode past the two men, pushing through the courthouse doors. The familiar sterile hallways welcomed her like an old routine, the click of her heels against the marble floor steady and unwavering. But inside, she was still reeling. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice. And yet, in that moment, she had been reduced to nothing more than the color of her skin. And the trial hadn't even begun. The air inside the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Reporters lined the back of the room, their cameras poised, their pens ready to document every moment. Spectators filled the gallery, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and quiet outrage. This wasn't just another trial. This was a case that had gripped the city, one that had ignited conversations about race, justice, and the power dynamics embedded in the legal system. At the center of it all sat Kevin Daniels, a young black man who had done nothing more than stand on a street corner waiting for his rideshare. And yet, he had been arrested, handcuffed, and thrown into the back of a squad car as if he were a dangerous criminal. The charges? Loitering. Suspicious behavior. Leah Marshall sat at the bench, her expression neutral, composed. But inside, she could feel the weight of what this trial represented pressing down on her. She had spent years upholding the law, believing in its principles, but today, after what had happened outside the courthouse, she couldn't help but wonder how much of the system was built to protect people like Kevin, and how much of it was designed to work against them. The prosecution called its next witness. "Your Honor, the state calls Officer Bill Wilkins to the stand." Leah's breath stilled for a fraction of a second. She hadn't even known the officer's name before this moment. But now, as he stood from the prosecution's side and made his way to the witness stand, she recognized him immediately. The same young officer who had tried to detain her outside the courthouse. The same man who had looked her in the eye and refused to believe she was who she said she was. Of all the officers involved in this case, it had to be him. Wilkins walked stiffly, his posture more rigid than it had been outside. If he recognized Leah, he gave no indication. But she saw the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers curled into his palm as he swore his oath to tell the truth. The prosecutor, Samantha Green, stepped forward, her tone sharp and precise. "Officer Wilkins, please state your name and position for the record." Wilkins cleared his throat. "Officer Bill Wilkins. I've been with the New Orleans Police Department for 3 years." Samantha nodded. "And on the night of Kevin Daniels' arrest, were you the responding officer?" "Yes, ma'am," Wilkins replied, though his voice wasn't as steady as it had been earlier. "Tell us, Officer Wilkins," Samantha continued, pacing slightly, "what exactly led to the arrest of Mr. Daniels?" Wilkins shifted in his seat. His eyes flickered to the jury, then briefly to Leah before returning to the prosecutor. "I was on patrol," he began, his tone measured, as if reciting a report. "I noticed Mr. Daniels standing on the corner of Oakwood and 15th. He was looking around a lot, checking his phone. His behavior seemed out of place for the neighborhood." Leah's grip on her gavel tightened. There it was. That phrase. Out of place. Samantha tilted her head. "Out of place," she repeated, her voice carrying just enough incredulity. "Can you clarify what you mean by that, officer?" Wilkins hesitated. He didn't look like he lived there. A murmur rippelt trug the spectators. Leah heard it, felt it settle like a storm cloud over the room. Samantha didn't let up. "And what exactly about him made you believe he didn't belong?" Wilkins fidgeted slightly. He was acting nervous. Nervous? Samantha echoed. Or was he just standing there, minding his own business? Wilkins opened his mouth, then closed it. The shift in his expression was subtle, but Leah caught it, the first sign of doubt creeping into his features. Samantha stepped closer to the witness stand. "Let's be clear, officer. Did Kevin Daniels do anything illegal? Did he commit a crime? Was there any evidence that he was involved in something suspicious? Wilkins swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. No, he admitted, his voice quieter now. We didn't find anything. Silence blanketed the courtroom. Kevin Daniels sat motionless at the defense table, his hands folded in his lap. But his eyes, dark and unwavering, were locked on Wilkins, as if searching for some kind of explanation that would never come. Samantha's voice remained calm, but her words struck like a hammer. So just to be absolutely clear, Kevin Daniels was standing on a public sidewalk, waiting for a ride, doing nothing illegal, and yet you arrested him because, in your words, he didn't look like he lived there? Wilkins' face flushed. It's not that simple. But it is, officer, Samantha countered, her tone unwavering. Because what you're describing isn't law enforcement. It's racial profiling. The tension in the room was suffocating. Leah let the moment sit, let the weight of the truth settle over everyone present. Wilkins shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't as confident as he had been earlier that morning. He wasn't gripping his belt like he had when he stood in front of Leah outside the courthouse. He was just a man sitting in a chair, forced to reckon with the reality of his own actions. Samantha turned to the jury. This is the problem, she said, her voice strong, clear. This is why we are here today. Because a young man was arrested, not because he committed a crime, but because an officer saw him and assumed he must be guilty of something. And that assumption, she turned back to Wilkins, is rooted in prejudice, not in justice. Leah exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain impartial, to stay composed. But inside, she felt it. The slow burn of anger, the weight of injustice, the bitter knowledge that this was not just Kevin's story. It was hers. And it was far from over. The defense attorney rose from his chair, buttoning his suit jacket as he strode toward the jury. His expression was composed, but there was an unmistakable tension in the way his fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. He knew this case was slipping through his fingers. Everyone in the courtroom did. But still, he had a job to do. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice smooth, practiced. What happened to Mr. Daniels was unfortunate, yes. But let's not forget that police officers work in high-pressure situations every single day. They have to make split-second decisions to keep our communities safe. Officer Wilkins was simply following protocol. He saw something that seemed suspicious and took action. Leah watched the jury, observing their reactions. Some remained impassive, but a few shifted in their seats, their brows furrowed. She could sense their unease, their internal debate. The defense attorney continued, his tone growing more insistent. Did Officer Wilkins make a mistake? Perhaps. But was it intentional? Was it malicious? Absolutely not. We cannot punish an officer for doing what he was trained to do, what he thought was right in the moment. If we do, what message does that send to the men and women who put on that uniform every day? He paused for effect, allowing his words to settle. Then, with a sigh, he turned to Kevin Daniels. Mr. Daniels, I am truly sorry for what you went through. No one should have to experience that. But punishing Officer Wilkins for an honest mistake will not fix the larger issues in our justice system. Leah clenched her jaw, keeping her expression neutral. She had seen this argument before. The idea that these moments, these injustices, were nothing more than unfortunate misunderstandings, that officers like Wilkins were merely victims of a flawed system rather than active participants in it. Samantha Green, the prosecutor, rose from her chair the moment the defense attorney took his seat. There was no hesitation, no measured pause. She walked to the center of the room, her heels striking the floor with quiet purpose. When she spoke, her voice was steady, unwavering. The defense wants you to believe that this was just a mistake, she said, turning to face the jury. That Officer Wilkins was simply following procedure, doing his job. But let's be clear, this is not just about one officer's actions. This is about a pattern. A pattern that has existed in this country for far too long. She stepped closer to the jury box, lowering her voice just slightly. Kevin Daniels was arrested not because he committed a crime, not because there was any evidence against him, but because he looked out of place. Because a police officer saw a black man in a neighborhood and assumed he didn't belong. That assumption, she glanced briefly at Wilkins, who now sat rigid in his chair, his gaze fixed on the floor, is the very definition of racial profiling. Samantha turned back to the jury. We cannot keep calling these incidents mistakes when they happen over and over again. when they ruin lives, when they strip people of their dignity. Officer Wilkins may not have intended to cause harm, but intent does not erase impact. And today, you have the power to hold him accountable. Silence gripped the room. Leah let out a quiet breath. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on everyone present. The jury was dismissed to deliberate. The room emptied out slightly, leaving behind a tense stillness as people whispered among themselves, waiting for the verdict. Time moved slowly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury returned. Leah took her place at the bench, her face unreadable. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman, a middle-aged woman with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, stood. She held a small slip of paper in her hands, her knuckles slightly pale from gripping it too tightly. "We have, Your Honor." "Please read the verdict." The woman unfolded the paper, cleared her throat, and looked up. "In the case of Officer Bill Wilkins, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of wrongful arrest and racial discrimination." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Kevin Daniels exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the edge of the defense table. His lawyer patted him on the back, and for the first time since this trial began, a flicker of relief crossed Kevin's face. Leah let the noise settle before lifting her gavel. "Court is adjourned." But just as the room began to stir, as reporters scrambled to leave and people started filing out, a voice cut through the noise. "Your Honor, wait." Leah looked up. Officer Wilkins had risen from his chair. His face was pale, his shoulders tense. He hesitated for a moment, as if second-guessing himself, then took a step forward. His voice cracked when he spoke. I need to say something." The room quieted. All eyes turned to him. Wilkins swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, but he forced himself to continue. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting the community. But I was wrong." His gaze fell to the floor, his voice heavy with something Leah couldn't quite name, regret maybe. "Shame. I let my assumptions, my prejudices, cloud my judgment. I arrested a man who did nothing wrong because I saw something that wasn't there. And I'm sorry." Silence. Leah studied him, searching his face for sincerity. The apology felt real. But real wasn't enough. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm but firm. "Your apology is noted, Officer Wilkins. But understand this, saying you're sorry doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the damage that's been done. And it certainly doesn't absolve you of responsibility." Wilkins nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging. He didn't argue. He didn't try to justify himself. He simply stood there, accepting the consequences of his actions. The courtroom began to empty, people filing out in hushed voices. Leah remained seated, watching as Kevin Daniels hugged his family, his face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw Wilkins again, standing near the exit, waiting to be escorted out. For the first time since that morning, he wasn't just an officer on duty. He wasn't a man gripping his belt, standing in front of a courthouse door with an air of authority. He was just a man who had finally been forced to see himself. Leah exhaled. The trial was over. But the fight for justice? That was far from finished. The courtroom was nearly empty now. The reporters had left, their headlines already forming. The jurors had gone, some still wearing the weight of their decision on their faces. Kevin Daniels and his family had walked out together, holding on to their moment of justice, however fleeting it might be. Leah sat at the bench for a long moment, staring down at her hands, at the polished wood beneath them. She had presided over many trials in her career, had heard countless arguments, testimonies, and verdicts. But this one stayed with her. This wasn't just about Kevin. It wasn't just about Wilkins. It wasn't even just about this courtroom. It was about the system. The cracks running so deep they threatened to swallow the very people it was meant to protect. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up as Sergeant Michael Harris stepped inside. He removed his hat, tucking it under his arm as he approached. His presence was steady, familiar. Leah had known him for years, had seen him navigate the same broken system, trying, against all odds, to make it better from within. "Judge Marshall," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Sergeant Harris," she replied, watching him carefully. He sighed, glancing around as if to make sure they were alone. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "After everything that happened today." Leah gave him a small, tired smile. "I appreciate that. But I'm fine." Harris studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I know today wasn't easy. And I know you probably don't want to hear this right now, but this is why I stay in this job. Because if I leave, then the only ones left are people like Wilkins. And if no one fights from the inside, nothing ever changes." Leah leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "You think it's that simple?" "Nothing about this is simple," Harris admitted. "But I do know that change doesn't happen overnight. It happens in moments like this, in people like you, like me, people who refuse to accept the way things are just because they've always been that way." Leah let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "The problem is, Sergeant, that we're playing a game we didn't design. And no matter how hard we fight, the rules always seem to be in someone else's favor." Harris nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe. But that doesn't mean we stop playing." She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "Justice can't rely on a few good people inside a broken system. It has to be rebuilt from the ground up." Harris tilted his head, considering her words. Then, after a pause, he said, "And that's exactly why we have to keep fighting." He set his hat back on his head, giving her a small nod before heading for the door. "Take care, Judge Marshall." "You too, Sergeant," Shemom uret. The door shut behind him, leaving Leah alone once more. She glanced at the empty courtroom, at the seats where the jury had sat, at the chair where Kevin Daniels had told his story, at the stand where Wilkins had faltered under the weight of his own actions. She gathered her things, slipping into her coat before making her way toward the exit. The courthouse was quiet now, the day's tension lingering in the air like an echo. She had no intention of walking through the front doors. She knew the reporters would still be waiting, eager to shove microphones in her face, demanding soundbites on what this case meant, on whether today had truly changed anything. Instead, she took the side door. But as soon as she stepped outside, she stopped. Bill Wilkins was waiting. He stood near the edge of the building, leaning against the stone wall. He looked different now. His uniform no longer seemed to fit him the way it had this morning. His shoulders weren't squared with confidence. His posture wasn't rigid with authority. He looked smaller. Leah hesitated. Part of her wanted to walk right past him. Instead, she met his gaze and waited. "Judge Marshall," he said, his voice rough. She didn't respond.
Wilkins streikte ins Lichtli, exhaling a slow breath.
I didn't want things to end like this." She arched an eyebrow. "Like what?" "You being held accountable." He flinched but didn't look away. He shook his head, frustrated with himself.
"I don't know.
I don't want to be that guy anymore." Leah's expression remained unreadable. "And what guy is that, Officer Wilkins?" His jaw tightened. "The kind of guy who makes assumptions about people without realizing it. The kind of guy who thinks he's doing the right thing when he's actually part of the problem." She watched him carefully, searching for signs of empty regret. But there was something else in his face now.
A Hesitation. A Kind of quiet Desperation.
"I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued, shifting on his feet. I want to do better. I want to understand what I did wrong. I want to change." Leah inhaled slowly, considering his words. Then, after a long pause, she said, "You can start by listening. By realizing that this isn't just about you, or me, or Kevin. It's about something bigger than all of us. A system that needs to be torn down and rebuilt." Wilkins nodded, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. "I want to learn." Leah held his gaze for another beat before shaking her head slightly. "We'll see." She turned, stepping away, not looking back. She didn't know if Wilkins would actually change. She didn't know if today had made any real difference. But she did know one thing.
The fight wasn't over.
And she wasn't done yet. Leah Marshall sat in her office, the weight of the day pressing down on her. The courthouse had emptied, the echoes of the trial fading into the late afternoon hush. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the storm that had just passed through its courtrooms. People went back to their routines. Headlines were being written. Conversations were shifting. But here, in this quiet space, Leah allowed herself a moment to reflect. She set her gavel down on the desk. The smooth wood cool beneath her fingertips. A tool of authority, of law, of justice. And yet, justice still felt like something just out of reach, something she had to fight for every single day, even in a role where she was supposed to uphold it. The trial was over. The verdict had been delivered. Kevin Daniels had won. But had anything really changed? She leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting toward the window. The city skyline stretched before her, tall buildings casting long shadows over the streets below. Somewhere out there, Kevin was probably with his family, finally able to breathe after days of uncertainty. Somewhere out there, Bill Wilkins was sitting with the weight of his choices, knowing he would never wear the badge the same way again. She thought about what Wilkins had said outside the courthouse.
Ivan Tulian.
I want to change. Did he mean it? Or was it just another moment of guilt, the kind that would fade as soon as life moved on? Leah had heard too many apologies, seen too many promises of reform that never came. Words were easy. Change was hard. She reached for a stack of files on her desk. Other cases, other names. Kevin Daniels wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. There would be another trial, another victim, another fight. The system didn't shift overnight.
It resisted.
It pushed back. It forced people like her to prove again and again that justice wasn't just an idea, it had to be made real. And yet, today, something had happened.
A small step forward.
A verdict that told the world that racial profiling had consequences. A moment where the truth had been spoken, and for once, it had been heard. It wasn't enough. It never would be. But revolutions don't start with grand gestures. They start with moments like this. A knock at her door broke the silence. Her clerk, Emily, poked her head inside.
Judge Marshall, you heading out soon?
Leah glanced at the files again before exhaling.
Yeah.
Just finishing up. Emily hesitated. You did good today.
Leah gave a small, teared smile.
We'll see. As the door closed again, she let out a breath and stood, gathering her coat.
The fight wasn't over.
It never would be. But today, justice had been served. And sometimes, that was how change began. If this story made you think, don't just scroll away, take action. Like this video to help spread awareness. Share it with your friends and family, because conversations spark change.
Comment below and tell who as your two cooks.
Have you ever witnessed an abuse of power? Let's talk about it. Follow our channel for more powerful real-life stories. And turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Change starts with awareness. Awareness starts with you. Be part of the movement.